Welcome back, everybody, to the Industrial Insights podcast. Today, we're diving deep into the future of supply chain and industrial strategy with Joe Dunlap, founder of Blue Jay Advisors. I'd love to learn where Blue Jays came from, by the way. And then Joe's built a career spanning, I saw it started at UPS and then all the way to a couple of top-notch tier one consulting firms, Accenture, Fortna, that everybody knows who's in the space. And then you got to manage the CBRE supply chain practice to some extent. So that's one where that's next level in the real estate sphere. So having all that as background experience is perfect for today's conversation as we think through how people are adjusting and redesigning their networks, how people are struggling and having great outcomes with warehouse automation. And then something that's new, I think, to the industry, which is finance coming in and real estate investments and overlapping with warehouse automation. So, Joe, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I'm glad to be here.
The first article I thought that was the greatest place to begin was this warehouse as infrastructure concept and an interview you did with, I'm not sure if it was Economic Development Agency for the state of Virginia, but municipalities are getting involved in land use planning, and we're all thinking about the value of industrial real estate going forward and environmental concerns. It's kind of the high level conversation. So warehouse as infrastructure, it's not just real estate. So help us frame that context, if you would.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, the interview was with the VEDP, the Virginia Economic Development Program. And the topic came up, I think, really part of how that state is looking at their investments to support growth in the state. And the question was asked of me, are warehouses infrastructure? Because we typically think of utilities and things like that as infrastructure when we're trying to develop a property.
Roads, bridges.
Yeah, infrastructure means something different. But I think when you look at what people typically look at as a visual representation of the supply chain tends to be sort of this linear from left to right, from raw materials to a plant or a manufacturer to maybe a port of origin to a port of destination. Maybe it's drayed inland to a warehouse or a distribution center and on to the customer, whether it's a retailer or other. As you follow that line of the supply chain explanations, somewhat of a simple version of it, you begin to see all of the aspects of real estate all along the way, whether that be the manufacturing location, the warehouse, distribution center, the ports themselves. So all along the way, real estate becomes a very key part of various supply chains, and warehouses as a part of that you could think of as infrastructure that allow you to sort of meter between the variability of demand and the variability of supply and size that inventory storage, the size of the building relative to your uncertainty, the changes in supply and demand.
Yeah. It's, I could only imagine if you're a state and you're trying to compete, and then you're trying to compete with states that are adjacent to you that have all sorts of like a center of gravity for activity and for absorption and for jobs and job growth. Like that would be a terribly difficult position to be in to figure out, like, how do I increase investments and deal with some of the challenges that come with the people's perception of industrial real estate and bring that together. And you brought up ports. I had interviewed the CFO for the Port of Long Beach just recently, and so it was awesome to learn more about how they're investing. Their big project was rail and being able to like transload and load shipments and automate some of that, and that being something that we think of product coming into SoCal, but we don't often think about product going out of SoCal on the rail. And like, do we want that? I thought we wanted it in SoCal, where when you're the port and you're a piece of infrastructure and you're thinking like a big picture, you're playing the national game, even though like that's a piece of like state specific infrastructure.
Yeah, clearly it's both. I think the ports serve a role. They create sort of that center of gravity for a lot of volume, either exports or imports, both really, that creates sort of a strong economic environment. But you can't just limit it to inside that state itself. A lot of exporters are outside of the state of California, but it goes via rail or intermodal to the port and then leaves the country in that way. And in the same regard coming in, So the port thrives off of being able to serve a broader basin than just the state itself.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind backing up for a quick second, Joe, perhaps I didn't give a proper enough introduction for your lane or lanes and like where you play, because you play both in supply chain consulting, you play in the real estate space. Maybe you could give us a little overview, and that will help people like contextually with some of these conversations that are coming up.
I think I'm perceived as somewhat of a real estate professional, and it's probably an incorrect perception. I've worked within real estate companies.
CBRE, that'll give a big connotation, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, to give you more background, I spent about 9 years at UPS in a wide variety of roles, from being a part-timer finishing school. My first time role was a computer technician. I worked in industrial engineering. I worked in business development. I worked in accounting for a short period of time. Back in those days, UPS had this philosophy of minding the store, meaning that if you could work the cash register, sweep the floor, greet customers, stock the shelves, you understood the business more broadly and would make better decisions on behalf of the business. And so one of my last roles at UPS was as a customer automation supervisor. And that meant to UPS mainframe to mainframe integration for invoicing, billing, customer service, et cetera. And they subcontracted that to, at the time, Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture. And that really broadened my opportunity to get broader supply chain exposure. I spent in total about 10 years at Accenture, and eventually leading the operations fulfillment practice for North America. Everything from systems design and implementation for WMS, yard management, other systems, to strategy, network design projects, to business process design, different projects that really gave me a lot of understanding of not just the different types of consulting and supply chain, but also across different industries. I left and started a supply chain business at Dematic to get in front of the big RFPs that occur in that industry. You can imagine tens of millions of dollars for automation systems. The obligatory 3 bids and a cloud of dust comes to mind as a phrase.
Yes.
A lot of innovative proposals that make you think about it and differentiate you as a provider, but harder to make, meaningful decisions. So, the business plan was really one of, you have 2 options. You can either extend your salespeople to focus more deeply on a fewer subset of clientele. They may increase their win rate, but they lose some of the pipeline as a result of focusing on fewer opportunities. Or you can build a consulting capability to get in front of those RFPs and keep some of them from being competitive, or at least learn something to be different. And I did something similar when I went to Fortna. At the time, they were, $100 million in revenue, and really focused on consulting inside the 4 walls. Now they're almost $2 billion. But part of my role was to broaden their supply chain consulting beyond just inside the 4 walls. Inventory deployment strategy, network design, 3PL selection, things of that nature, to broaden their pipeline as well. And I did essentially the same thing 3 times in a row. The next one was at CBRE. I spent about 9 years there and doing the same thing, same services, getting in front of their engine that drives their business, the transaction, through the same type of services. So that's what I mean when I say I'm a little bit of an outsider within the real estate industry, because I don't really participate in commissions or other types of traditional broker roles. But
We're warm. We'll welcome you in, Joe. We're a pretty jovial bunch. It's okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, but I totally get it. You're dealing, I always say, serving the same master, right? And it is
Essentially,
part of dealing with the evolution for the organization. And then
it's dealing with the client's journey from, I describe it as discovery, prioritization, selection, implementation, support, generically. And, selection is in this case for real estate, is the site selection. But to figure out the discovery, what problems do I have? Where are those problems? Prioritization, I have a fixed budget. How do I prioritize which of those initiatives to spend money on this year? And then maybe some of them are a real estate decision and that selection process and so on.
Yeah, I love it. That's perfect. And then real estate investing. You're not investing, you're helping counsel the group that you are part of to understand the supply chain implications and how to structure some investments.
My last role at Legacy Investing was to help stand up essentially a new business line focused deeper on industrial, but differently. and bundling the real estate capital with the automation capital and creating a single lease structure for the tenant.
Yes.
The key to it really was something that Legacy had been doing for decades in data centers, which I didn't know much about. Essentially, that the landlord tends to own not only the property in the building, but also the equipment and technology inside of it. And they do something very similar. So they were applying that same experience with their equity partners to industrial. And it's something I found, maybe you've seen the same thing, where 10 years ago, a lot of automation was really the big companies were doing a pilot and $10-20 million, whereas the vast majority of small to medium-sized companies who also needed a lower cost per unit and better accuracy, et cetera, they need that to compete, but didn't have the capital budget to go automate. So I've seen more sort of
I
robots
wish
as a
that were
service.
different, but yes, that is still very, very much the case.
I think the difference is that working with the right landlord who can essentially, if it bolts to the building, connected to the building, the landlord can treat it like property and amortize the investment over a longer period, which lowers the cost. They can apply a real estate cap rate instead of a equipment finance loan rate, which lowers the cost. And then typically there's some period of free rent, which again, if you can implement the automation, be up and running and shipping within that, let's say 12 months for an existing building, you can essentially have an immediate payback period, if not, well within 1 year, which is unheard of in this business.
Yeah. Trying to go from not having it to having it, plus going from maybe your old building to your new building, and then thinking about downtime, phased move-ins, and just like it's a lot of friction. It's enough friction to stop most projects right in their steps. Yeah.
Risk. Yeah.
Yes. What could go wrong? All of it, and it could go wrong like terribly.
Right.
Yeah. Perfect. That's a great background. So now we got Blue Jay. Blue Jay, what would you say is top of mind for what's most relevant for what you're hearing from people and where you're collaborating with them on projects?
I think it's a very similar story that I've seen in different firms. It's just that in my position at Blue Jay Advisors, the objectivity is I'm more aware of the objectivity that the client sees me. I think the clients see me as whatever name badge, you're trying to get to that sort of a outcome. And I've removed that from my consulting with clients now, where Blue Jay is a bit more objective. I'm not necessarily trying to get to a real estate opportunity. I'm not necessarily trying to implement a warehouse management system or type of automation. I'm really trying to solve problems and help drive value.
I love it. Joe can just do what Joe does best and not worry about a lot of the bureaucratic parts that sometimes can change. Are you in alignment with your client?
Well said.
That's huge. I love it. That's great. It's I've got so many topics that kind of fit what I'm seeing out there. Some of it that's interesting is that I saw you may participate in is turnarounds, transformation. What I see is a lot of PE-backed firms. And so dealing in the middle market, if you're not with the Fortune 500, you have a lot of private groups that are in manufacturing, not always, but when the founder sells the business, maybe the buildings are not, whether that matters, and then what happens next, or when companies keep getting rolled up or they keep getting sold. It is interesting to see groups they just change. They change what they're focused on. They change what they have to do. They change who they're aligned with. And so I could imagine PE firms always be like, Joe, how are we going to squeeze value out of this? Or rather we're trying to put firms together. How are we going to get the synergy or the goodwill bonus that we're trying to get in combining firms? So you deal with PE a little bit, or I got to imagine you deal with manufacturers or other firms that are in industrial real estate that are going through challenges, and maybe a turnaround and transformation isn't just PE based, right? That's anybody that has the dip and the smile is turned into a frown, and then they pick up the phone and they're like, Joe, we're trending the wrong direction. So there's a lot of challenges. What would you say are some of the main things that you're seeing and people are dealing with?
So yes, that's one of the focus that I have for Blue Jay. Really, there are three. Blue Jay provides turnaround transformation services to those PE firms for distressed holding companies, provides data-driven supply chain insights to real estate owners and investors to make smarter investment decisions and asset decisions, and then to provide supply chain consulting services to the traditional, like you said, manufacturer, wholesaler, retailer type as well. In fact, I'm just finished a project for a private equity firm that had acquired another retailer, and I would say just in general, anytime a company is going through, and there may be situations where the two companies are not aligned, they're in different territories or geographies, and their infrastructure, their warehouses or distribution or manufacturing are in different geographies and serving different customers or manufacturing different widgets. And so by part of that acquisition, perhaps they want to grow their businesses synergistically across each other's territories. And they may, initially just ship, cross ship, or they may build those capabilities to manufacture in both geographies or hold that inventory for distribution in both geographies. Some version of that may suggest, depending upon the companies, that they don't overlap and they need that capability, or they already overlap and perhaps they need to consolidate some of those assets into fewer locations to take out some of the redundancy, drive some cost savings. It's really situational. There's not a single way to approach these. The one I just completed was the early due diligence, pre-close validation of some of the early due diligence around some of the cost takeout. The acquired company was operating at a loss most recently. And so there was some stabilization, stop the bleeding kind of activity to drive some immediate cost takeout. And then later on, after things do stabilize and those savings get implemented, there may be some synergies between the two companies, but it's a bit too much, too fast. So I could tell you more a little bit about it offline.
Yeah, that means you're in between the deal and the goal line. And they're like, oh man, Joe, all right, take a look at this. Tell us what you think.
Yeah. In that particular situation, there won't be a new facility decision, whether it's a consolidation or a new added location. Most likely there'll be a sublease. They'll stay in the current facility and give up part of the building because they don't need it, because they're likely to close some of their stores, and there'll be a potential for a sublease transaction.
Yes, don't worry. It doesn't always have to be transactions. But yes, it's oftentimes are related though with changes, right? A change oftentimes has a personnel change, has a footprint change, and has some ramification inventory.
It's
too.
worth saying it more broadly, actually. Any kind of change, particularly disruptions since COVID, right? We talk about changes as disruptions, whether it's, tariffs or something else that disrupt the supply chain. But in general, I talk about 5, business imperatives: growth, contraction, M&A, change in the service promise to the customer, or risk mitigation. And anytime a company is going through business changes that involve one of those macro business imperatives: growth, contraction, M&A, change in the customer promise, or risk mitigation, anytime there's a change at the business level in one of those, there's typically going to be a change in the supply chain. Oftentimes there is a real estate impact, and that's really where the real estate community gets excited.
Yes. What type of tools or analysis do you bring to the table? Like in this example that you had mentioned, that's a big picture, right? And then you have what I have come to learn in my few sessions learning about modeling supply chains and trying to bring software to the mix. The amount of variables is off the charts coming from the simpleton real estate world where you just have your known 100 variables. So I imagine
Yeah.
you know what to look for and you know the tools to use and you have a specific types of analysis that you perform. Can you expand on that or help people understand that better?
I wish there were a pithy short answer to that question, but it's a bit broad. So let's tackle it with this caveat. Let's assume that you're asking me about supply chain network design or optimization or some version of that. And let me give you a little more situational context. Let's say the company has one facility for the whole country that services the whole country versus, a company that has, say, 30 facilities across the country and they're hyper local, like beer and beverage distribution tends to be hyper local versus maybe a single manufacturing or single e-com fulfillment center that covers the whole country. And the reason I give you those as sort of context is the degree of accuracy and the location varies, or the need for accuracy varies, right? In the latter example, if I'm doing a beer distribution or something that has a very local customer base, you're probably more interested in route planning and route design than you are in network design, for example. And the reason I draw that distinction is that a network design, and you've probably learned this through your master's program if you've gotten this far yet, that most people in real estate would probably cringe at hearing this, but in network design, it's really a 3-digit zip code level of accuracy. The real estate,
Halfway through my first version of taking this and applying it to the first client and like learning this one. Yeah.
and that's the interesting distinction when people think about real estate site selection versus supply chain network design. The network design is going to get you to how many geographically where, how big, how many people, what's the business case. But it's not going to get you down to, in this city, there's 14 properties that meet your size requirements and there's different trade-offs within them. That's really the real estate, excuse me, brokers' area of expertise. But what got them there was that supply chain network design. Now maybe when you get down to site selection, they need to run some type of a route planning process. But it gets pretty tricky if it's a dynamic routing versus static routes. It's different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And I got to imagine there's different tools for different parts of your work that you do for a client. So that's just on the network side, but I would think with like A and PE back, they're usually juggling like we now have 10 more of these and how do we mesh them together?
Yeah, and just a quick comment about it. I mean, if a company is perpetually doing network design, for example, they may need one tool and they need to bring the tool in house. A consultant may be able to help them establish that capability, build the initial model, train them on how to use the tool, and transition it in-house as a part of the project. Whereas in my experience, most companies will do a network design once every 3 to 5 years, maybe. And so it's a once and done kind of a thing where you're doing that work outside with their data outside and you're providing the outputs, not necessarily transitioning the tool and the capability.
Yes. Then connecting to like inputs live or real time. Yeah, I would imagine your work and the 3PL world overlap quite a bit, whether it's CPG or like corporates that are figuring out how to utilize 3PLs or what part they want to insource or outsource, or working with 3PLs in their own internal processes and operations. Where do you and 3PLs collide or combined? Because
It
there's
depends.
such a huge growth in our industry, right? And it's such a big, who's
Yeah.
absorbing 30 to 40% of every square foot of concrete that we're pouring in the ground? It's these guys. So I figure that they got to be in your world, and you probably have work for them and for people who work with them.
Yeah, this could get into multiple conversation topics, but you're correct that in the broader industrial real estate segment, 3PLs tend to occupy about a third, and growing to close to 40% of a lot of the transactions that happen. Pretty significant. My world with 3PLs is a little complicated in that they can both be clients who require similar services, or they could be recipients that compete for a opportunity with a client where I may be doing an outsourcing strategy that includes a 3PL selection process and potentially an RFP. So I can work with 3PLs in multiple ways in that regard. The one quick comment about 3PLs and automation, if you're ever interested, you probably see this occasionally yourself. There's a firm called Armstrong and Associates who is typically quoted in the press anytime there's any analysis about the 3PL industry or listings of here's the top 50 3PLs, et cetera. And they published something a couple of years ago that validated what I already knew, which was 3PL contracts tend to be on average, 2 or 3 years in term, which prohibits a lot of real estate savings from the broker's standpoint, because the longer the lease term, probably the better the rate, or lower the cap rate at least. So 3PL contracts, they're not going to sign a 10, 20 year lease for a contract that they have for 2 or 3 years, right? So they coincide the
Not if
lease
they're thinking
term.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. They tend to coincide the lease term with their client contract. And that also prohibits automation and innovation for a lot of 3PLs. So it's a sticking point for me with from a lot of different points of view as to how I can best add value when there's a 3PL involved.
Yeah, I love that insight. And it's interesting because the pandemic flipped that on its head, where rents were going up so fast and so high in this temporary like environment that term became bad because it prohibited you from participating in the next rental increase. So a lot of institutions went to short term, knowing that then they could participate in that. And then now the dust has settled. And now I always think and ask people like, is term good or is term bad? Now, like, is it advantageous or is it like a prohibitive? And it really has led to like people thinking about term not as either and just as like opportunistic. So where is there opportunity if we go long or short, depending on the building and the submarket and the landlord? So it's kind of funny, but with investment, it that didn't change, right? Like you can never have a shorter term be better for investment. So yeah, that's the bummer about it. That's one of the obstacles that's in the that we need like better solutions for.
It was there all along. I just don't think that the real estate industry acknowledged it. Give you a quick example. Take, for example, a company that doesn't currently sell or distribute into the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if my business is going to grow in that area, but we need to try it out. So I need a facility to serve the Pacific Northwest. Well, because I have some uncertainty, I don't want to go take down a building and do it myself. I want to test it with a 3PL. So that may be a short-term 3PL contract and a short-term lease makes sense. But in another example where a company strategically outsources their fulfillment and distribution capabilities, classic example with Nike, for example, they don't necessarily have that philosophy of operating it themselves, but they do have a long-term, I'm going to put a facility in this market and it's going to be there for the foreseeable future, at least 5, 10 years. Then they're probably better off not necessarily insourcing it, but having direct control over the lease and then putting a 3PL warehouse operator inside of it to operate it for them.
Yes. It blew my mind at first when I started to differentiate in there and like I learned more about it. And then the recent one that is recent to me, but is where some of these larger corporations will buy the automation even for property that they have outsourced like the fulfillment for. And so, yeah,
It's
it gets all jumbled up, but ultimately I got to imagine control, capital, risk, like those are some of the reasons why big firms with big
you're
footprints need to do that.
You're describing what I began to coin as deconstructing the 3PL contract. So deconstruct it in terms of, as you started to describe, the equipment, the capital equipment, the systems, warehouse management system, yard management system, et cetera, the labor component, and then the real estate. So when you think through those different components, there are certain situations in which the company, the client, is their interests are best served by owning one of those bits. Maybe they have a great WMS in other facilities. They want to use their WMS in that building instead of having a 3PL implement another one. So there are various reasons why those different components, some may be best that the client has responsibility. Some may be better that they have the 3PL take responsibility. It just depends on the situation.
Yeah, spoken like a master who's in the game. You're like, okay, here's the food groups, and this is, and you got to find where the alignment is and the risk, and that's fantastic. Yeah. What I think it does is it helps you have the more relevant conversation with people. Like I understand the complexity and like where can I add value? Which one are you struggling with, or which one do you have like a competency with, or like a long-term investment with, and where else can I like help improve like your overall supply chain?
Exactly.
Which food group is top of mind that keeps you up at night, or keeps most of your clients up at night? Would you say
Food group meaning 3PLs or insourcing or
of the deconstruction of the 3PL contract?
well, maybe it's circumstantial, but I think the discussion around automation has driven a lot of my activity over the past few years. I mean, even before I went to legacy investing, I was having that observation and talking about CBRE investments to accomplish something similar. I just think there's traditionally a risk aversion from a landlord's perspective. When you think about it, most landlords don't even want to own the pallet racking in a building.
Yep.
Why is that? Because one tenant may want VNA and the next tenant may want wide aisle or turn it 90 degrees or more pallet racking instead of half pallet or quarter pallet racking. And if you're doing 3 or 5 year leases, that doesn't have a good payback to put that whatever $1 million investment into the racking. But as your term is extended and you've got, your rate sort of pegged to CPI or something, then I can take on that additional investment because I'm going to see a return over the longer horizon. And I think the real driver behind this are companies that are trying to, lower their costs. They're having to pick products and ship them within a shorter window to be able to not only enable next day delivery, but same day delivery, which is slowly expanding well beyond just Amazon. So those are really, you can throw more people at it, but that comes at a higher cost and potentially a higher accuracy issue or accident rate. So trying to automate it can solve a lot of problems and really getting behind the primary focus of shortening the picking window.
It's so funny. You would totally think people like cube work, which is like the WeWork for industrial, where they take a 200,000 footer, they put up all these chain link fences. So if you just need overflow for 6 months or a year, you can get 2,000, you can get 20,000, you could get 200,000, and they do short-term contracts. So they do the long-term contract on the building, and then they do the short-term contracts and they piece it out. You would totally think they would be ones that while they're at it, like, there would be one way to standardize pallet racking enough where someone who is an operator or an investor, like, it's so funny that is, it just doesn't pencil, or just doesn't, like, there's not enough uniformity in the need to have that be in
Right.
place.
You keep scratching on things that I have a very definitive point of view on. So forgive me for always trying to
Get in there,
respond to your
Joe.
comment.
Yeah, tell us about it.
There are there are half a dozen or more companies like CubeWorks that have emerged over the past 7 or 8 years. That, to your analogy of a Regis for office, kind of a model for warehousing, but because they tend to cater to smaller companies, I'll give a trivial example. Joe's home craft ideas that has outgrown his local garage needs a small warehouse and a do-it-yourself warehouse where I can go process orders, et cetera. And so fragmenting that up into a single 200,000 square foot building, like you just said, maybe I only need 25,000 square feet. So it's hard to drive synergies in that model for the individual companies unless you, as the landlord, in this case, I'll draw analogies of them to a 3PL, they're not as willing to take on that capital investment. And by and large, I don't see that having changed in the industry, in the broader industry outside of that specialty type of provider. The one thing that's different, not only with what I was describing earlier about automation, is that I think more of these large 3PLs are getting closer to the willingness to take on that risk. And the evidence I'll point to is a company called Symbotic that you might be familiar with, or your viewers will be. Is that Symbotic is an automation firm that struck a JV with SoftBank and a company called Greenbach,
Okay.
which, if I understand it correctly, is going to actually operate much like what you described with automation. But now, instead of having dedicated space in a multi-tenant building for one client or another, I can put Justin's inventory on top of Joe's inventory and somebody else that occupy the same square footage, but now they have to be able to track and invoice off of cubic utilization or usage as opposed to just square footage. And so I think that automation capability to drive costs down, better accuracy, lower, injury rates, et cetera, is something that type of provider is going to change the industry in one way or another.
Perhaps it could even make smaller volumes still profitable, or like that would be one way that you could like spread out
Yeah,
that cost and
it
make your
gets back.
market bigger.
I totally agree with you, but I think the class of automation is probably different. When I say class, I'm referring to more of a AMR, a mobile robotic solution that's already more of a RAS, robots as a service, a transactional cost, as opposed to something that truly is capital. I've got to put in a structural automation solution that gets that dense footprint, storage footprint.
Got it. I was not thinking about, yeah, that being like how that might manifest. Yeah. And then I would still stick on like the 3PL and insource and outsourcing. I got to imagine like that topic never goes away and the decision never is done. Like it's just, I feel like the more we talk with the clients, the more that like they're always contemplating like, okay, this time we're going to bring it in source, or this time, you know, we're going to go outsource for wherever they are at on their journey. So that's something that you help people deal with. What should we do? When should we do it? What are some of the like a topical like things that people are wrestling with when making that decision, like in today's environment?
It starts with where the client is. So if a client has never outsourced or doesn't currently outsource any of their operations, and I'm talking strictly, warehouse versus contract manufacturing or something, it's a little bit of a religious conversation. Somebody in that company worked
Church
with a
of Supply Chain is in session. Yes.
somebody in that company somewhere in their past has worked with a 3PL, and they either had a great experience or they had a horrible experience. And that's what I mean by a religious decision. They'll swear that they'll never do it again, or they'll always want to or prefer to use a 3PL. So I find that usually taints some of the initial acceptance to considering outsourcing.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Just like how extreme is was their last experience, and
Yeah,
like, can you overcome that, or is it like, gosh, you have a strong belief, and like, I'm gonna have to go with your strong belief because I'm not in the belief changing business.
it depends upon the influence of those individuals. If that's the chief supply chain officer, he or she is going to drive the decision. If it's a general manager or somebody lower in the org structure, you may be able to overcome it. Worst case, the organization changes, those people leave and go to other companies, and the question comes back up again. So yeah, it does tend to be a cultural type of thing sometimes to get it started.
I would think you would be brought in and be a change agent, right? Oftentimes, but it's still like they have to live with it, right? With the decision, and Joe's
That's right.
off and working on the next thing and supporting perhaps, but they got to be on the 365, 7 days a week with it.
Yep. Yep. That's right.
Yeah, it's awesome just thinking like how people are evolving now, how we're going to absorb all this new construction, and where we're at in the market, just as we think through of like, have we bottomed, and like how are rents going to go? And I can only imagine rents as they go up, that's more overhead in addition to these investments that are all expensive and like a capital intensive, and like we'll need the growth to pay for all of that. So I could see you're going to be employed for as long as you want to be, Joe. This need's not going away.
Yeah, like I starting a small consulting firm like this, the way I explain it to my wife is that there are supply chain consulting needs in macroeconomic times of growth and in macroeconomic times of contraction. And in both periods, there are, supply chain consultative things going on that have always kept me occupied in my previous employers as well. So knock on wood and hold my breath. I think it'll be good.
Yeah, you had been in an article I had seen or that you had posted about that was like a rewriting the warehouse ROI. I think it was area development. And it was basically just as people are thinking through like what's like when you're making any of these investments, like the conversations I hear is like they needed to pay back in 2 or 3 years, and gosh, they want it to be 1 to 2. And usually that's with like how much additional throughput could there be? Have you seen much change in how people think about that, or how they're like trying to rationalize making some of these investments, whether it's a warehouse automation or other like a supply chain related investments?
Certainly, because area development, that conference where I did that presentation, that paper was primarily economic developers in the audience.
Okay.
I was trying to help them understand, particularly rural areas. So I guess the analogy is, oftentimes when a company says, I know I want to be in Atlanta, pick a city, right? The economic development group, the state, they really drive a lot of pursuit and horsepower behind that to attract that company to come to Georgia. And the client already knows I want to be in Atlanta. A lot of the other rural areas surrounding Atlanta or elsewhere in the state don't usually benefit because they can't attract companies. Why? At least in this example, I'm trying to convey where a company needs, say, 1,000 people in the building. It's going to be a hard, 7 days a week, 3 shifts a day, 1,000 people. It's going to be pretty hard to
We
put
only
that
have
building.
40,000 people in this town.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So that's where a lot of the labor analytics come from with consulting services and real estate to answer that question. But what I was trying to convey is, like I was describing earlier about infrastructure automation being a part of the building, because you can go from, say, 800 or 1,000 people to potentially, 100 people. If you fully automate that operation, now I can attract that building into a more rural area that doesn't have the labor shed to pull from. Now I can bring economic growth to that area because not only are there, shouldn't say it this way, not that there are fewer jobs, it's that there are better paid jobs. Instead of a material handler or a forklift driver in that 1,000-person facility, in that 100-person facility, because it's automated, I have mechanical engineers, technical programmers, I have mechanics, I have higher skilled, higher paid jobs. So that 100 people that I bring to that rural community, those are more like manufacturing jobs in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And they could use them, and then the company benefits by being there too, and like a symbiotic. So you must be optimistic then on more manufacturing, like that we're rebuilding our manufacturing base, and like there being more like manufacturing in the U.S. and like that resurgence and energy, and like trying to figure out what does that mean for us and what does it look like. I got to imagine you follow that then, or like pay attention to it.
I do pay attention to it. I don't necessarily follow it on a regular basis. Part of that's only because the volatility with tariffs, from one week to the next has created a lot of confusion about what the outcome is going to be. But certainly I do think some of the resurgence and onshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, pick your flavor of resurgence. The difference, I think, in our generation with that versus, say, our parents' generation is that I don't think the job growth is going to be corollary to the manufacturing resurgence. I think that automation we were talking about a moment ago is going to mitigate a lot of what would have otherwise been significant hiring. And so that's probably a good thing given the number of factors. Wage rates have been skyrocketing for as long as I can remember. We've have an immigration program now that a lot of that lower wage skill set is not available. So it's almost, this, I wouldn't say the stars are aligning, but I really do think that the automation has an even bigger value proposition given the circumstances.
Yes, that's this not labor collapse, but like what is labor? What's the labor environment, and how is it evolving, and how does that interact with manufacturing? Yeah, it's not going to be what we had before. That's that's for sure. Yeah. And then last, I'm conscious of the time, so we are making it to the end of our hour. You went back to school, Joe. What were you thinking? Man, going back to school is tough for people to contemplate sometimes. I'm a glutton for punishment, and just in the trying to always be learning and evolving. Like that is one route towards doing that, and that effort. And sometimes for me, I found the structure and the accountability like helps make sure that you do it. And having a great program, of course, makes a huge difference. So could you help us understand like what your experience was like and kind of what you appreciated about it?
My experience was one of I wanted to get a master's a long time ago. I'll be 57 next month, and so it's a bit late in life for me to think about the value proposition and ROI on an investment like that. But it was something I wanted an MBA, and I never got one. I kind of felt like I experienced an MBA through my work experience, but I felt like, do I know what I think I know in supply chain? And frankly, it was a bit more of the inspiration of being around like-minded people who are always curious and want to learn. That really gave me a lot of motivation and inspiration to work with younger people. But yeah, it turns out I know more than I thought I gave myself credit for. Wasn't necessarily to get a career boost at this point in my career, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would love to, do some adjunct or something in the academic world that would, keep me close to it, because I enjoy the curious minds that don't have the experience that I have and kind of ask me questions to share stories that are useful, as well as just the academic sort of theory of different supply chain.
Yeah. Consider this your first adjunct professoring assignment right here on this podcast, Joe. Yeah. It's so funny for us brokers usually do goofy things in the quest of, if one deal came of it, the ROI will have penciled out, because we're not like a traditional career folks. You're more based on like a projects. And so, not that you go there in search of projects, like you go there in just the quest of like understanding better. And I love it. The part I found that I wish there was a better solution to is, okay, you can connect with the faculty and with the learning of the different subjects along the way. But the school part, when you think of like going to USC and your social network and like the fun part of college and like all the friends you make along the way, I feel like it's so tough to figure out how you make that a better experience for people doing the executive programs or doing the online programs. That's the part that like I have found I've had to work kind of just as hard as I have on doing the actual schoolwork itself, to make sure that like I'm making the most of the opportunity, because there's great people there, but you just have less, you don't just bump into each other in the hallway. And
But you're
though
doing
if
the
I was,
distance learning program, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I
what,
did. I did too. I mean, I felt I was pleasantly surprised with the frequency of interaction with the staff and the project teams that I was involved with throughout the curriculum. So, there's no other way you can do it and still have a full-time job.
yes.
But I think the experience, especially at my age, being back on campus, and there's no need to go to parties and socialize as much as
You can
you're there
have
to
a beer,
learn.
Joe. Come on, have two. Yeah, that part might be gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well,
love
tell
it.
me, I got a question for you, Justin. I mean, some of your audience that are also in the real estate profession may have curiosity about you and why you took on a master's in supply chain management. And in particular, I'm curious about your point of view prior to going through it. Maybe this is a better question once you get through it, but has your point of view shifted a little bit? And if so, how?
Yeah, it's one I found buddy to go with me. So we did it together, which was awesome to have like the let's push each other to make the decision and take action. And then let's like help hold each other accountable. For me, it was kind of more like there's got to be more to this than what I'm experiencing. And so I found that that's what led me to business school and to do like the real estate development program at USC, was like, is this it? Is there more? Like, surely there's a lot more. And then you scratch, and there's like an infinite amount that you can learn and like collaborate and participate with. So I think once my book of business became more users, tenants, corporates, like companies that utilize the industrial real estate, it became less about the property and then more about like what are we doing with it? What's our product? Who's our team? What are we trying to do? And so the more I would have repeat clients and like have long-term clients that work on a national basis, the more it was like, there's a whole other part of the business that I haven't even like I've scratched the surface on, but like I can't walk a mile in their shoes. And so that was kind of like the people that I'm serving, how do I help them better if I know what they're dealing with and what their life looks on the daily and what they're responsible for, the decisions they make, the tools they use, and I can't pretend to be them, but I can understand them or understand them better. And so you can get that with each individual relation, but you'd like to come to the table with something to give, not something to take. So I don't want to learn off of them. I want to come to them like with more value. So that's what brought me into this idea and into that program. And then specifically, which one was, there's what it costs, when it is, and that kind of stuff. but it was the who has network design and optimization modeling classes. And that was one thing that I did all the Argus modeling and all the Excel modeling in some of my prior classes. And that was not like a superpower, but it was something where it was a skill that I didn't have to outsource, that I could master, own, and like help out with. And anytime I would win a larger project, I could execute it and like have the confidence that like I will be accountable to the success of this project for you because I have that skill that I can utilize and deploy for you and for the team. And so I didn't have that in the supply chain realm. I didn't know I needed it in the supply chain realm, but as I started to peel back the layers, I'm not trying to be like a modeler or like a consultant, but just to like know what goes into that and like how much complexity, how do you get value from it, how do you have like a baseline model. And that was probably the last obstacle or last thing I knew I wanted to learn from going through it. And so I was like, I won't embarrass you if you let me in the program and if you let me take that one as soon as humanly possible. And so that was one of the first ones I was able to take that was perhaps a little quicker than most might, but just coming to the table a little further along my journey, like that was something where they understood that that was going to work. I'm so thankful that that was an opportunity. And then walked out of that with like, there's so much more I don't know, but at least I gained like a working knowledge of being able to do baseline stuff, and then just like a appreciation for like when is that helpful, how does that help people, and like now people share their studies with me and I can read them and
Yeah.
understand like what it took to make them and like how that actually like now will dovetail into anything that is real estate related.
Wow. I love that about you. And kudos. I don't think I know anybody else in the real estate industry who is getting their master's in supply chain. I have a feeling you're going to get a lot more of your peers coming to you asking for your advice about getting theirs. And at the end of the day, whether you're doing that work or not, what I think the value is enabling you to have more meaningful conversations with your clientele about where the value is, where you create more value, or where you lead them to drive value elsewhere. I think in the long run is going to help people like yourself. And I anticipate seeing many more real estate brokers doing something similar.
Could totally see it. Yeah, if I thought of like a B school, it was great. But for someone in my specific shoes, I would think I would choose this over that, now knowing what I know. And it only took me 15 years to figure that out. Yeah.
Well, this isn't the last thing you're going to have to learn.
Yes.
Like I said, I'm still learning every day, doing something different every time, and I thrive on that. If I had to do the same thing every time and every opportunity looked the same, I'd probably get bored. So the industry that we work in and keeps us perpetually learning and curious.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe, and everybody listening. Stay curious, right? That's part of what we got out of today, and so much great detail. I look forward to catching up with you, and glad that you spent the time so we get to know each other better and provide value for people out there.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Okay, see you later, Joe.
See you.
Bye.